Assalamu alaikum, guys. Just a quick note before the podcast starts to say that we're still raising money to provide an education and safety to child street workers in Bangladesh. These children have been pulled out of education either to support their families, so they're having to work on the streets, or they've been forced to work on the streets, and we're trying to get them out of there and back into an education. You can see all of the information and the link in the notes.
Guys, we are coming to London doing our live event, Freshly Grounded, Operation Excellence, September 22nd. We've mentioned it before. We're going to keep mentioning it. It's an amazing, amazing night. We're going to have people who are at the top of their fields talking about excellence, talking about how to unlock their mindset so we can try and achieve things in all different types of fields. So if we talk about health and fitness, we've got two amazing people, Ajmal and Lats, who have accomplished things that a lot of us have never accomplished. An example is the championships that they've won. Ajmal specifically, and how they're around the people that they're around. We know that Lats is on Team Anthony Joshua. Their mindset, what the mindset of that unit is like. And little things that we can take from these guys that we don't know is their discipline, how they get to the level that they're at, to be such elite level athletes. The mindset has to come into play. So a little example that I used before is that Ajmal weighs his ketchup. Like, this is how disciplined the guy is, that he weighs even his ketchup to make sure he achieves the goals that he wants to achieve with his food, for example. This is a level of discipline. This is a level of mindset that we want to try and achieve and unlock and find out how he can be so disciplined. We've got Omar, who is going to talk about the fact that he dropped out of his business degree after a couple of months because he decided that he wanted to learn practically, and how he went from dropping out of business school to having clients such as Dell, Deliveroo, Adidas. Some of the biggest companies in the world have been his clients or still are. And we get to unlock that. And most excitingly for me, Rahman Akhtar, who went from, with his wife, looking for pennies underneath the sofa to be able to pay their rent in their council flat in Hounslow, to working for the world's richest company. And he's going to be doing a keynote on mindset, especially considering he lost his wife about a year and a half ago. So how he kind of dealt with that and overcoming challenges. Book your tickets, guys, at freshlygrounded.com/tickets. You're not going to want to miss it. And do we want to do a little drop in price for this episode? All right, why not? freshlygrounded.com/tickets. Get £10 off your ticket. If you go there now, you get a ticket for £15. There you go. Done. We've actioned it. Guys, listen here. Everybody knows that if you want to look suave, especially in a suit, especially in the occasions that we have, it's wedding season. And on top of that, just in general, if you're in business, everyone needs a good suit, right? And we believe that everyone needs a good tailor-made suit. And that's why we partnered up with Bukhari Suits to get you guys, to let you guys know about these amazing tailor suits that these guys do. First of all, you can fully customize your suit. This includes choosing your own fabric, including the buttons, the lining. You get a little custom message you could put in between your suit. I've been measured up. I can't wait for my suit to come. And my suit inside, it says something. It's you guys will see what it says. I'll show you guys when it's done. But you can choose what you want to write in the middle, inside your suit. You can. Most people get their initials in it when it's their nikah day or the date of their nikah. They're giving £20 off to Freshly Grounded listeners for their first suit. If you just quote FG when you DM them, when you request a quote. They use 100% merino wool, and they do not mix their fabrics with lower quality fabrics, which most other suit companies do. This means that your suit will last a lifetime if you look after it. They also do multiple fittings. This is what I think is amazing about these guys is two things. A, their tailor comes to you, so you don't have to take time out and go and try and find them. And secondly, they do multiple fittings. So I've been fitted once already. The tailor came to my house, he fitted me up. And then they're going to make my suit now. And then once the suit's ready, the tailor comes back, delivers my suit, hand delivers it. And then I put it on, and then he adjusts me, measures me up again so that it's absolutely perfect for me even once the suit's here. Guys, check them out. Go on Instagram.com/Bukhari Suits. That's BUKHARI Suits, SUITS. And drop them a DM. Cool. Guys, this episode is with Ustad Tim Humble. Oh my days. We love when he's here. You guys love when he's here. We always trying to extract the most wisdom from him while he is here. He's only ever here for short periods of time. Alhamdulillah, he always blesses us with a lot of his time. So the episodes tend to be like 2 hours long. In this episode, in kind of the first episode that we done with him, it was like his overall life story and how he converted to Islam at 14. And in the second episode we done with him, we wanted to focus on like jinn, shaitan, and stuff that he's kind of known for. And so with the topic of this episode, we wanted to talk about like marriage and children mostly. So a lot of this episode, the bulk of it is about marriage and children, relationship advice. It's really, really powerful. Raising children, some of the challenges that married couple have, like when one person is more serious about religion than the other, how to raise kids in that kind of environment, and a bunch of stuff. We do talk about a few things at the beginning. I'll try my best to timestamp this episode in the comments below. If not, if anyone else wants to help with that, that'd be amazing. But in the beginning, he kind of speaks about why he no longer uses a mobile phone. He also talks about how he teaches to learn the Arabic language and how anyone can learn the Arabic language. But like I say, the majority of it is about marriage and children. A very, very interesting episode with one of our favorite guests of all time, who continues to bless us with his presence. Guys and girls, this is, I believe, episode 121 with Tim Humble.
And welcome to Freshly Grounded, the brand new podcast by best friends Faisal and Sam.
Huh?
I said welcome to Freshly Grounded,
No, after that bit.
the brand new podcast
And after that bit?
by best friends Faisal and Sam.
Really?
So, when I found out that you were here in the UK, I dropped you a text message.
Yeah.
And I noticed that it only went to one tick, which is obviously a sign that the person's phone is off or lost or broken.
Yeah.
But alhamdulillah, I caught you yesterday in the masjid and I said, Ustad, I texted you and you mentioned that you're not using your phone anymore at all.
So when you sent me that message, you mustn't have read the status that I had set.
No, I didn't.
Because if you read the status that I set, it says
I should have realised that's something that you would do.
I'm no longer using my phone, and I've actually, shockingly, even for me, I've given up my phone. And a lot of people, when I gave up my phone, a lot of people said like, "Oh, were people disturbing you, and too many people calling you?" Or if it's a particular person, they get a little bit upset about it, and they're like, "Look, I never used to call you that much. There wasn't something, But reality is, I never gave up my phone because of people calling me. I gave up my phone because I couldn't detach myself from it. And I just found, one thing that was really profound for me is one time I remember finishing the salah and being, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and then just taking out my phone to check who messaged me. And I thought is that what it's come to now? Is it got to that point where I don't even have time for istighfar, to say astaghfirullah. It's just straight to the phone. And I thought, what it is? I've got to cut down. So obviously, cutting down is one thing, not taking the phone to the masjid and what have you. But in the end, I actually just felt that for me personally, and I don't enforce this on anyone. I'm certainly not saying to everyone you should get rid of your phone. But for me personally, I found that in the work that I do, I didn't really need it. And it was more of a problem for me than a benefit. And actually, I just found new ways of communicating with people, like actually meeting up face to face, saying to somebody who says, I need to talk to you, instead of saying phone me, just saying, what it is, let's meet for a coffee in this place. Let's get some, speak face to face. So for me, I felt it worked out well for me, to be honest with you.
It's interesting you say that because I have this discussion with people, not about the phone, but I have this discussion with people. I actually had one yesterday after your talk. A brother came up to me and he was kind of talking about podcasting. And I said that I actually feel really blessed to be in the position that I'm in, that I'm able to do podcasts, because I feel like I get access to a type of conversation that it's so old school that people don't get anymore, which is you're sat in front of a person and you're for about an hour or two having just deep conversation, no technology, no phones, and I don't know where else I get that. So Allah has given me an ability to actually have that conversation, meet new people, socialize, and network with people in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do before. And people just don't have time, unfortunately, nowadays to sit for a couple of hours and just have a chat. And so I think I'm in a really blessed position to be able to do that. But we have lost that art, haven't we?
Yeah, it is a bit of a lost thing. Even sometimes when I say to people now that why can't we just meet and talk about it? That it's a strange thing, and it is sad. I think that we are overly reliant on the phones and technology. I think it's become to a point now where families sit around the table and each family member is, on their phone. Maybe the solution for that is not for everyone to get rid of their phones, but it's just maybe to reduce it a little bit. But for me personally, I just felt so much better when I got rid of that phone.
What about people who would say, in emergency situation, what do you do?
Like in emergency situation, don't get me wrong, I have a few things. First of all, I always have data on I have my iPad with me and have data on it. But I don't find the iPad to be such a problem because it's too big and too complicated to kind of be just flicking through it without a need. So if I pick my iPad up and I bother to lift the cover off and unlock it and do so, it's usually because I need to. That's the first thing. And then I think that, if I really needed it, I have a phone in the drawer that's just, it just doesn't have a SIM card in. I just take the SIM card out, put it in if sometimes I need it. There's an odd week where I need it. And other than that, I think, emergencies, I don't know. Yeah, I personally feel in my personal situation with the general things that happen to me, I'm quite happy not having it. And I think the other thing is family were really supportive. And when I spoke to my family, actually, my wife was pretty much like, that she was encouraging. She had wanted me to get rid of it, or at least to cut down on using it, to be honest. So that made a big difference. I think if family was really, against it, I probably would have just cut down on it and kept it aside. But to be honest, what, like people say, does your wife not want to call you? I said, if it was my wife calling me, I wouldn't have got rid of the phone, to be honest with you. The reason I got rid of it is because it's just me always I've got a habit of reading the news.
I do that.
I just read the news, and alhamdulillah, I cut it down. I went to text only, just so I just get the headline. But I still had a really bad habit of, when you check the news 3 times an hour, the headlines haven't changed.
Oh,
it's the
I
same
just check it
thing.
once in the morning. I have to check the news. Just to
Yeah.
see kind of what's going on in general.
I haven't got rid of it completely. I still have a habit sometimes at night on the iPad. I'll still open the iPad up, but I'm trying to get out of the habit of just being constantly just doing insignificant things, things that don't matter.
You come across to me in the kind of the times we've met over the years. You've come across to me as a person who prioritizes efficiency, and there's a book by Ramit Sethi that I spoke about on this podcast before, and he talks about a convenience and valuing convenience. And these little aspects of life that I think like high level performers really care about, stuff like efficiency. Would you say that like even you taking away your phone, it seems to me like your priority is efficiency, making sure you get things done to the best of your ability with the best quality, and also kind of not getting stuck on things that don't require your time necessarily. Would that be true?
Yeah, I think that it's a double-edged sword, definitely. And I think in terms of efficiency, I've definitely become less efficient in certain things. Because for certain things, having a phone with you is incredibly efficient way of, for me to meet somebody and to have a conversation with them face to face is generally, in many cases less efficient than just picking up the phone and calling them. But I also feel I've become more efficient in the things that matter to me. That, for example, one thing that really used to upset me a lot is study. I felt like to do the job that I do or the role that I play, you've got to be continuously learning. You can't ever stop learning. Otherwise, the day you stop learning, you're no longer, there's a lovely saying, lovely Arabic sort of proverb. They say, فَاقِدُ الشَّيْء لَا يُعْطِي. The one who doesn't have something can't give it. If you're not constantly learning and getting that knowledge, how are you going to give it out to anybody? How are you going to share it with people if you're not getting it yourself? Who are you going to tell people, you should be learning, you should be studying your deen, and I'm not studying it myself? So I felt like the things like the phone and everything, that was getting in the way of that. It wasn't phone calls getting in the way of it, but it was just generally being busy with those things. So in that way, I feel like I've become more efficient in what matters to me in a way. But yeah, also at the same time, there's definitely a trade-off. There's some things that have become less efficient. And some people have suggested, why don't you get one of those, really simple phones that doesn't have anything on it? Yeah, that's a possibility. But for me, I just like the freedom of not having it in a way. I've become kind of addicted to not having it. I had to have it for Hajj. When I went to Hajj, I had to have a phone with me because I was a religious guide for a group. And, you need to be able to be in touch with people all the time. And, you're guiding a group through crowds and things like that. So I kept the phone with me. It felt really unnatural to me after that. I felt really kind of like, I've got that phone thing, even though it was just a simple phone, So yeah, I think a bit trade-off. In a way, I've become more efficient. In some things, I've become less efficient, but maybe I feel like I've become more efficient in what matters to me and what I value and greater quality out of it.
Well, even stuff like your emails, the automated response that that is on your emails. I read it and I thought, this is so Ustad Tim. Like, one of the things that you mentioned is that you check your emails once. Was it once, twice a week?
Yeah, once, twice a week.
And that's something that I don't know if you've read the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss.
Yeah, I like that book a lot. Yeah,
because he talks about that, and
I think that book has a lot of value for a Muslim in it. To be honest with you,
I agree, and I think that I learned a few things, especially with regards to emails on that book. With regards to like the efficiency in emails. And right now we're kind of looking at putting an event together, and being able to action something, and then when it requires kind of action on a higher level, seeing that person in and saying this person has kind of the authority to make any decisions up to £1,000. Contact them if you need to.
Yeah.
Just having one email that outlines everything. In an emergency, I do have my phone on me. Call me anytime. But like that's a last. You're kind of last resort.
Yeah.
I loved how he assigned things. So I started implementing things. So
Okay.
as soon as I read your email, I was thinking, that's very Tim Ferriss-esque.
Yeah, I to be honest, I'll tell you what I benefited from that book. The concept that your time is more valuable than the other things that we traditionally value, like money and like and you know all those other things. And I think from an Islamic perspective, if we understood that, we would actually get a lot more out of our life and our, you know, religious life, spiritual life, if we realize that our greatest asset is time. Because often we compromise on that and we waste it a lot on a lot of things that, you know, we think that we're doing that for a reason of it'll give us a financial benefit or something else. So I think that was really, that really struck me, that principle. Even though that principle is something mentioned in Islam and we knew it by just reading a book on productivity, and someone says to you, look, your time is what really is the most valuable thing you have because it doesn't come back again.
Have you read, the listeners of Freshly Grounded are going to get so angry at me for saying this because I've mentioned it so many times. Have you read The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday?
I haven't.
Oh, Ustad, I'm going to get you that book, inshallah. You need to read that. Now, well, you don't need to read it. That sounds very rude. I mean that if you like Tim Ferriss' 4-Hour Work Week, I think you'll like The Obstacle is the Way. For me, it was beneficial because there's a lot of concepts in it that as a Muslim we can't obviously take from it.
And that's true. Like, to be honest, all books that are written by non-Muslims, generally speaking, we put them through the filter of Islam, right?
Yes.
We look at even 4-Hour Work Week, whatever it is, we put it and we look at it and on the scales of Islam, what isn't compatible, we're just going to put that aside. But there are things you can benefit, definitely.
Well, in this book, it basically talks about Sabrun Jamil, which is what I really love about it, because it puts the context of Sabrun Jamil, which was hard for me to understand from a purely Islamic basis, because I feel like there's not enough English lectures on Sabr and Jamil, and like the actual concept of not only sabr but that type of sabr. And so when I read this book, The Obstacle is the Way, as you can hear from the title, it talks about the idea of the whatever obstacle comes your way, using that obstacle and actually going through it rather than trying to avoid it. And it talks about kind of people of the past who had major obstacles in their life, and they neither went to extreme happiness when they got good news, and they neither went to extreme sadness when they got bad news, and kind of how they dealt with these situations. Again, like I say, there's a lot of this that has to be filtered, but I really love the concept of that book. I will reiterate that you don't need the book. I feel awful for saying that. The idea of it was how much I enjoyed that book, but I think it's a really, really cool book to read. Do you think that I often find myself like pre-cueling these conversations with people and saying like, oh, kind of take it with a pinch of salt. Do you think that it is dangerous for people to read books like this if they don't have like a base level of like understanding the Aqidah or something?
That's a really good question. I think there's a couple of things here. I think number one, too much reading of books that are, you know, too much reading the stuff that's written by the non-Muslims. That is definitely, because every time you go into that, you are going into an area where it might not be safe. It may or may not be safe depending on what the topic is. So too much of that could be a bad thing. Bearing in mind that whether it's productivity or whether it is how you spend your time or whether it's patience, all of those things are present in Islam. Yet we may not have the best access to them. We may need them to be a bit repackaged in a way that we can understand them better. And that's a great job for someone who is an Islamic teacher to go and take concepts that people need, that people are reading from these books, and to present them in an Islamic way. That's an amazing thing. But I think that also it depends on the topic. You want to avoid things that start to get into the sphere of religion and philosophy and things like that, you know? Because philosophy and religion, that's where you're going to start putting yourself in an area where you're getting it very firmly into Islamic territory there.
I agree in that and the book that I just mentioned, that's one thing that I found with it is that it is very philosophical, and there's a lot of it that it's like, again, you got to be so careful with. I found that a lot with that book.
So for those things, you do need to have a basis, and you need to ask yourself, is there a benefit? Is the benefit worth it? Not is there a benefit? Because there are benefits in many things that are also have harms in them as well. And like, for example, look at the way that Allah describes alcohol and gambling in the Quran. That there's a benefit in it. وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. There's a benefit for people. There are benefits in it. وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِن نَفْعِهِمَا. But the problem is that the harms are much greater than the benefits. So sometimes when you go into these things, you think, yeah, I could benefit from this book, but in comparison to what I could be, alternative things I could be reading or alternative things I could be doing, does it come out as that, there's a real benefit? But to be honest, some of the books I read, written by non-Muslims, personally, productivity and optimizing my time and organizing myself, because I feel that's something I'm weak at. And my aim in reading it is to get nearer to Allah. It is that I want to be able to do more study. I want to be able to help more people. I want to be able to achieve more dawah-based or Islamic goals that I have set for my life. And I feel that the biggest obstacle of that is I just don't have any idea how to organize my time. I'm really disorganized and, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I read books that are written. I try and make sure that I've reviewed them. I try and make sure I've read a synopsis, read a few pages from them, and I've got an idea that it's not going to be particularly sort of imposing on my religion. And I hope that I would have enough knowledge to filter it out. But even then, I don't want to put myself in danger like that, So I want to look at a book that's hopefully not, it's more going to help me in a practical sense. And then I would try to take draw parallels where I see that a principle is supported by Islam, make a little note. For example, someone tells you the value of, let's say, working through the obstacles that you have. I would definitely make a note in the margin there about the Islamic concept of sabr and say, let me draw parallels there and let me see, why have I not picked that up from Islam in the past, or why is there something in there that I need to be aware of? And then maybe I can repackage that and pass it on to people in a more Islamic way. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I think that the issue of sabr is something that I've always been intrigued by. The issue of sabr and jameel is something I was intrigued by when I found out about it, because I found that my personal downfalls, a lot of them come back to sabr. And even if I react back, because I always saw sabr as just having patience, and that's it. And so I can't relate having patience to me losing my head on something or reacting to a situation badly, because I couldn't link that with I'm not being patient. But when I heard about this concept of having a patience that when you get news, instantly composing yourself, and that has something to do with patience, I could relate to it a lot, because I realised that a lot of my issues kind of come from perhaps being erratic with those emotions. And it's just about having that emotional independence. So I think that was a really, really cool, that's a really cool concept that I feel perhaps maybe I just haven't found it I haven't looked in the right places for it, but I love hearing about.
So that's going to bring us to an interesting topic. Arabic language. How much of it is the case that the reason we haven't had that is because that material, that explanation of sabr, and I agree, sabr is a way of life. It's an entire concept that stretches across the actions you take, the things that you don't do, why you do things and don't do things, and how you react. Reacting to events that happen is not even, it's only a third or a quarter of sabr is about reacting to things that happen to you. Consistency in what you do, sticking to something and not moving around in it, and not being someone who gets what do they call it, shiny new thing syndrome, where you just like, you see something new and just change, you just go for it like that. That's all a part of sabr. But the question is, how much of that is explained and exists in the Arabic language, but it just hasn't been brought out for us in English? And I mean, I must admit, as soon as we talk about sabr, I'm thinking about Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah ta'ala. Their works that he has, and I'm not just talking about the famous ones. There's a small one on sabr that's been translated, patience and gratitude and what have you, but just the amount of the huge breadth of work that he has that hasn't been translated. It makes you think that sometimes the reason in the English language that we don't have access to that is because it existed in Arabic. That material that you needed about sabr and jameel, it was there in Arabic, but it just hadn't been brought into English. So that was something you and I were talking about before.
Let's talk about that, because you teach the Arabic language, and I think that you're right in that you hear so often that the key to like unlocking these concepts is accessing the Arabic language and learning and studying the Arabic language. What's your take on studying the Arabic language for an English speaker, like the majority of our listeners, like myself, and kind of the best way to practice it? You often hear that kind of the only real way to do it is you go away to like Egypt or something, and you live there for a year and you study it, and then that allows us to use that as an excuse and to say, you know what, because I don't have the ability to go yet, I'll just study when I can go. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I've come to a very different belief about or a very different idea about studying Arabic than I had in the beginning. I studied Arabic in a very traditional way. I went to Medina. We studied from the Medina books, which are quite old. They were written quite a long time ago. And it's very sort of, it's quite a traditional way. And there's lots of variations on it. Some of the books are more picture-based, some of them are more writing-based, some of them. But ultimately, it is quite a traditional sort of approach. And by traditional, I'm not talking about traditional as in early days of Islam. I'm talking traditional as in terms of learning a language as we learn it today in the last like 50 years or in the last 100 years, how people learned languages. It's kind of how people have been learning language for a long time. And it's a nice way, and it works for a lot of people. But what I came to the conclusion is I started to look at my students and ask, why isn't it working for all of them? And for a long time, I thought maybe it was me as a teacher. Maybe I'm just not, maybe I'm not patient enough with them. Maybe I'm going too fast. Maybe I need to change a book a little bit and go one way or the other. But what I found is, right, if you look at most of these students, most of them have certain things in common, the ones that were struggling. They have a time issue, time commitment. They can only commit a small amount of time. They don't have a massive exposure to the language, so they're not living in an Arabic-speaking country, or they're living in an Arabic-speaking country where Arabic is not the language that's spoken on the street. Like for example, if I look at the Emirates where I'm based right now, you can go through your whole life in the Emirates and not speak Arabic because English is so widely spoken, and the number of people who are citizens of the country is relatively small. There's a lot of expats there. So you can be in an Arabic-speaking country but still not really be forced or even feel any inclination to speak Arabic if you didn't have a motivation for doing it. So I started to look at these things and think, why? What are we doing wrong? And what I came to the conclusion, first things first, is that we need to separate two things. We need to separate Arabic as a second language from traditional study of Arabic for people who speak it. Now you might say, that's obvious, Tim, man, that's like, everybody knows that. But the reality is that almost every Arabic program you see today mixes the two up. So they have taken the approach of the classical Arabic. So here I am, let's say I was born in Saudi Arabia and I grew up speaking Arabic. The books that I would study for Arabic language are incorporated into the way that we teach Arabic to people who don't speak it. So we've mixed up Arabic as a second language. We've mixed it up with Arabic as a science, like as a its own science, so grammar and morphology and all that, and eloquence and all that stuff. We mix the two together in a big way. That's, I think, the first thing you need to do. So once you stop, and because that's a very traditional, and it's very guarded, it's like that's how all the generations before us learned Arabic. But hold on a second. That's not how they learned Arabic. That's how a native speaker developed the skill in Arabic to be able to understand the Quran. It's not how someone who never spoke Arabic learned the language. So for me, I started to get rid of all that traditional way of learning Arabic.
As in like studying Nahu,
Sarf, Balagha,
okay,
all of it.
fine.
And leave that for people who actually have a reasonable understanding of the language. Leave that for them. I love it, don't get me wrong. I love that stuff, and I think you have to do that. But I just think it's a timing issue. We're giving it to people way, way, way too early. We're giving them before they even know how to say this is a desk and this is a chair and I'm sitting here talking to you, Faisal. Before they know how to say that, we're teaching them the different types of words and the different categories of verbs and whether this ending is a one that changes or doesn't change. I don't see why. So then I started to think, well, if I had the freedom to teach Arabic purely as a second language, just to get people started, just to be able to have a conversation and understand it, what would I do differently? And I thought, actually, a lot of things I would do differently. In fact, pretty much almost everything I would do differently if I wasn't aiming to cover the material in that nahu and sarf and balagha and all that stuff. If I wasn't aiming to cover that, I was a lot of things I would do differently. So what I recommend to people, and it doesn't matter whether you have a teacher or you don't, or whether you're learning yourself or you learn from a book or a video, or you go into a class, what I recommend is basically 3 things. The first thing is that you get yourself a really good vocabulary list and you memorize a set number of vocabulary every single day according to what you can do. That you don't need a teacher for that. You can do it by putting post-it notes on the wall or little flashcards or an app on your phone or whatever you feel comfortable with. But the aim is to increase your vocabulary as much as possible. That's one aspect. The second aspect is exposing yourself to the language. And that the easiest way to do that if you don't have a teacher is reading. And that's why I spoke to a friend of mine, a big influence on me. He's got a master's in second language acquisition, right? So it's nothing to do with Arabic. It's just to do with learning languages. And he said to me that the biggest way or the biggest sort of the easiest method for picking up a language is what they call, I'm not going to get too much into it, but corpus learning. So basically you have exposure to written material or audio material or videos or whatever, and you get yourself exposure to the language. And the way that I do this with my students now, children's storybooks.
I was going to say, because I haven't heard the third thing that you mentioned, but already I'm so intrigued because firstly, I started kind of saying that one of the biggest things I struggle with is I now feel a bit confident enough to perhaps like get away with having conversation where if I'm thrown somewhere, I could get my directions back to somewhere. I can ask where something is. I can survive. I can ask where the food is. I can get access to the to a house, to a hotel, etc. But if someone wants to ask me kind of something about like how to say no's, I'll struggle, right? So vocab is a big issue.
Yeah.
And then secondly, when you talk about the stories, I found that one of my teachers he recommended me to get Qasas an-Nabayin, and the minute I got that, and you're just reading the story of Ibrahim in Arabic, and you're stringing the things together, I realized that I could actually understand the whole story.
And that's a book for children.
Right.
It's probably a little bit, I would say it's a little bit too advanced in a way, because the language is still quite complicated. I would go even simpler than that to start with for a beginner, and start with, those, have you ever seen that, like the Oxford reading tree, and so we do with the little kids, yeah? The cat sat on the mat, and then, all this type of stuff, yeah? I would start with something like that, because you'll look at very few words on the page, big pictures, 3 words on a page, 4 words on a page. Even at a really simple level of Arabic, you feel like you're achieving something. And when I did that with my students, the first thing I saw as a difference in them is I saw that sense of achievement. Okay, I know you've just finished a storybook that was written for a 3-year-old, but they really feel like I've achieved something. I really feel like I've just finished a book, even if it's a book for a 3-year-old, even if it just tells me the cat sat on the mat, and even if it's only got 10 pages in it, and even if it's huge pictures and 3 words on a page or 5 words on a page, I just feel like now I've achieved something. And then they go up to a book for 4-year-olds and then for 5-year-olds. And the nice thing is these books are already written with structure in the language to teach little children how to develop their language. They're already designed by experts who are Arabic speakers, who are teaching little Arabic speaking children how to develop their language. Again, videos and things, I would start with perhaps a children's program or a children's documentary for very, very small children, very simple language, extremely, slow speech and stuff like that, and build up. It's important to have progression though, because obviously if you only ever read books that were for 3-year-olds, then, ultimately you're not going to progress. But the nice thing is, if you could tie your vocabulary to the books, and that's what I try to do in my courses now, so that they get the vocabulary, then they read the book, they already know what the words mean, and all they're doing is just seeing those words in context. It makes a big difference. It's actually bigger than just seeing the words written as an example. Like, for example, if I say the word for a door, right? I say bab, and then I give you a sentence. That's not as powerful as if you're reading a book in a story and the word comes in there. It's more, you feel like, I can see it in real life, not like an example that my teacher made up that I may never come across again in my whole life. And I mean, for example, the Medina books I studied are full of examples that Since I've read them, I've never heard a single person ever say that again.
A lot of stuff about the airports.
Yeah. I've never heard another person say that. And they're beautiful books. And I have a lot of love for the author who wrote them. Allah have mercy on him, Allah bless him. He did an amazing job. I just think that the problem is that those books work amazingly for students who've got 2 years dedicated sitting in Saudi Arabia. Beautiful. But I just think they just don't work for someone in London who has 2 hours a week and who is already struggling with time and who just wants to get something. The other problem is because those books are very, structured in the grammar and what have you, what happens is it takes forever before you can say anything. You take 6 months before you can have a practical conversation with anybody because it's built on the way that we study grammar as a native speaker. As a native speaker, you don't need to. You can afford that person to take 6 months to understand a grammar point because they already speak the language. But for us, it's more practical. It's more like, can somebody just start reading a little book? Can somebody just have a small conversation? Ask a small thing. That for me, it motivates the student. The student wants to continue, wants to carry on, and also it gives them the ability to start applying their knowledge right away. So, I'll give you an example. The Medina books delay most of the stuff about verbs until the second term. There's very little by way of verbs in the first terms, the books of the first term. But without a verb, how can you say anything? If you can't say, you can only say things with nouns. That's something I feel. The third thing is the rules of the language. But I believe with the rules of the language, what we tend to do in the West, most people who learn Arabic, is they learn loads of grammar rules. And they study grammar to the point they know grammar backwards and forwards. They know all the rules, but they lag behind it with a lack of vocab and a lack of practical experience of the language. So for me, what I would say with the grammar rules is just take what you need, take them slowly, don't overburden yourself so you feel like you've got so many of these rules that you're just lost in them. It's better to even just take one little rule a week, one little principle a week about how to make a sentence, one basic, idea of how to make a sentence with 2 words or 3 words. Just take one little one every week, one little point. Maybe when you read a children's story book and you come across a particular, how you make a sentence or how you put a sentence together, you can study that for that book and then move on. But don't overburden yourself by taking pages and pages and pages of grammar before you have any words to back it up or any practice in the language. And then, of course, definitely speaking. Speaking usually why I didn't put speaking in those 3 is only because if you're learning by yourself without a teacher, you might struggle to be able to do that. So you can get by for a little while just by reading and memorizing words. You can get by for a while. Definitely as you get into speaking, it's amazing. It's easy to get online people you can speak to. If you've got friends, it's about convincing them to speak to you in Arabic. And I love the way you said you had people that you speak to them in Arabic. That's amazing. That's much needed.
Yeah, I think the initial kind of fear of doing that was quite big. But when you have friends who are understanding and they don't, the fear is that they'll laugh at you or something like that, right?
Yeah.
That this person knows it a lot better than me. But I have this one friend and he knows who he is and we only speak to each other in Arabic. And the beauty in it is his personality. That's what the beauty is, because he will never make me feel stupid for how I speak.
Yeah.
And he has a lot of patience. So when I'm struggling with a word, he'll really wait, and it doesn't feel like he's getting annoyed and just wants to get the sentence out. He'll wait, and if he feels like I need the help, he'll kind of restructure his question or help me out with my sentence. So those things really need your help.
You need that, and then you need along with that, you need someone who's also willing to correct you. Because the other problem people have is they've got friends, they're chatting away in the language, but they've got a friend who won't, just loves them a bit too much. They won't correct them. They won't say to them that you got it wrong, and then you don't. If you don't correct yourself when you make a mistake, you don't improve in that way. And also it is a confidence thing for a lot of people. And some of the people, my students who've done really well in Arabic, are the ones who've got the confidence to make a mistake. And I always tell them, I put them at ease by telling them funny things that I've said in Arabic, where I tried to put a sentence together when I was first learning and I got it so badly wrong, and I said something so really badly embarrassing. And then I say to them that, look guys, that's what learning a language is. Did you ever find anyone who learned English that didn't say something embarrassing from one time or another?
I just remembered a really, really funny story. One of our friends, I won't mention him by name, he So he decided to say to his teacher, he was talking to Sheikh Jamal, and he said, Sheikh, when I speak to you even on WhatsApp, I only want to speak Arabic. I feel like that will help. And so the teacher said, okay, that's fine. So they've been talking for a while and stuff. And the teacher, he was kind of just poking fun. He should like having that kind of like fun kind of relationship with his student. And he said he was kind of pretending to be a bit upset at something that the student said, right? And so our friend, he was trying to say to the teacher, like, Sheikh, are you upset at me, right? Like, how I upset you. And in English, you might say, like, are you mad at me? Like, Sheikh, are you mad at me? And so the student, and this is in our early days, we were in like level 1, and he said, Sheikh, anta majnoon.
Are you insane? Yeah.
He said to the teacher, are you insane? And it was the
and that's an insult.
That's
in Arabic. That's an insult,
especially
right?
to your teacher. It's an insult to anybody, but to your teacher, aren't saying that. Are you like? So like the same word that's used to kind of say that someone doesn't even their deeds aren't even accounted for. That's how insane. So that's something that we had to laugh about. But it's true, because when you make those mistakes, A, you learn from them, and B, if you have people who you talk to who you feel you can make the mistakes in front of, it always feels nice. And our teachers, they do that really well. They say to us, look, make mistakes, and
definitely,
and it's nice.
So then I think, like, if a person sort of is more relaxed about, what I wanted to say to people is, relax about learning Arabic. Don't worry about all those grammar rules you couldn't understand. You couldn't understand how this particular sentence. Just let it go and concentrate on just doing your best in the language. When you get to a certain level, you can actually switch and start studying the very traditional way, text, grammar, nahu, sarf, morphology, all this stuff. And it becomes so much easier because you already have a grounding in the language. In fact, I give the example. If I take an average person, let's just say I went today to Saudi Arabia, to Jeddah, and I just picked a person off the street. It's not experience in studying. That person also doesn't know all of those grammar points. They just know how to speak the language. And they also could learn them through that traditional method that people have used since the time of the Sahaba, that traditional, or just after the time of the Sahaba, that traditional method of learning. That's beautiful once you've got a handle on the language. But when you try and give that to someone the first day that they came to learn Arabic, a lot of people quit and a lot of people walk away because what they've been asked to do is something really, really hard in comparison to just enjoying the language and just relaxing, taking it easy a bit. So that's my take on Arabic. I know it's not very traditional, but I've found that it might help people who are struggling to learn. There are some people who are going to be listening to this who already are learning the traditional way and doing just fine. And I would say, if you're doing well, if it isn't broken, don't fix it, right?
Yeah.
But for people who are struggling, just going back to simple vocabulary, children's story books, and just slowing down the grammar to just the minimum that you need to get by, and just focusing on enjoying the language, having a good time, making the odd mistake, but it doesn't matter anyway. And then later on, having a view to learning the traditional rules and grammar of the language. That will, for most people, that will help people who are struggling, inshallah. That's what I hope anyway. Well, you're welcome.
So I kind of want to move the conversation to a different topic. Yesterday you were given, and I think it's something that will be very beneficial kind of to everyone listening, because I mentioned to you last night that I feel like our listeners are kind of, a majority of them are in a stage where they either like fairly newly married within the past, let's say 5 years. So they're either having children for the first time, or they are about to get married or looking to get married, or they've just got married. So around that time where you're starting your family life now. So you've gone through education, or you're finishing education, you're about to start a new chapter of your life, and that very much so involves either you being the head of the family, or you having children, and all that kind of stuff. So I think that'd be kind of a really interesting discussion to have.
Yeah.
Last night you spoke about, and you were teaching about kind of, I actually had a question about the hadith, but because with the listeners perhaps don't know the hadith that was being discussed yesterday, I'll ask you off mic.
Yeah. So just this one, what we did last night was to go through the hadith, a very famous hadith called the hadith of Zara, which is a hadith of 11 women who got together to tell the truth about their husbands, and mostly to kind of complain about the problems their husbands had. And then at the end, there's a beautiful story about the one who said that their husband was the best ever. And then the Prophet ﷺ says to Aisha that, you and me, you and I, we're like Abu Zara and Zara. We're like the best example of that. And she says, no, you're even better to me than that. That's the context of what we talked about last night, right?
Well, if we're on the topic of it, I was explaining it to my wife last night. I'm probably doing a really bad job of explaining it. And it's funny because then when I mentioned the ending of the hadith, I suppose you get this reaction from different people. My wife's reaction was a bit like, oh, but so he left her for a younger woman. Like,
yeah, which he did. Abu Zar, the person, the last one mentioned in the hadith, that really amazing husband.
But he's an amazing husband.
But he left her for a younger woman. And that the benefit of that is the difference between the Prophet ﷺ and other men.
Okay.
That the Prophet ﷺ said to Aisha, you and me are like Abu Zar and Zar, but except that I don't divorce. So he's like saying that, look, Abu Zar, for all the goodness in him, but he wasn't perfect. He still didn't. He still, for all the good that he did so much good for his wife that his wife said even when she married another man and the man gave her everything, it wasn't even equal to the smallest thing that her first husband had given her. That's how good of a husband he was. But still he wasn't perfect, right? So when he saw that younger woman, he left her for a younger woman. He wasn't perfect. But the Prophet ﷺ is, and that's why our example in married life is our Messenger ﷺ and not Abu Zar. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but does it demotivate a person to think that I can't be a perfect human like the Prophet ﷺ, and a man who was so close in terms of how perfect he was?
Okay, I'm with you. Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
That's why the ending of the hadith confused me a bit.
I get it. I get what you're saying.
And I don't know if you saw my facial expression. I was like, oh, you don't expect...
No, I get what you're saying. I think in that, what you have to understand is you have to contextualize also that divorce in those times, and I'm talking about the time in the early days of Islam and prior to Islam, was not anything like it is today. It was something that was relatively common and relatively easy for both people to remarry. And that's why Zar, she says, yeah, he left me and I got married to another man and he was lovely and he was a great, horse rider and a very brave man and he gave me all these things and he, sent money for my parents, and it just wasn't, it didn't have that, where we contextualize it in our day and times where divorce is, the end of a person's life. Is massive, and it doesn't have to be, but for a lot of people, they can't remarry. You see how the Sahaba used to be that they didn't take divorce lightly, but if one of them divorced, that lady, she was remarried in a very short, as soon as her iddah was that she had, in fact, that Allah Azza wa Jal mentions in the Quran, that the men would be talking to each other about who was, about whether trying to get, that they could marry her even before her iddah was finished. Alim Allahu annakum satadhkurunahun. Allah knows that you're going to mention those women even before their iddah was finished. So it didn't have the same sort of profound life-changing effects on people. So I think you have to take that in a little bit of context in that way.
Let's talk a bit about the good husband and how a man can kind of work towards being a good husband or the best husband, and then kind of we can also go into the discussion of kind of the same thing for a wife, and then also kind of the idea of children, because when we first ever met, I don't know if you remember, do you remember when we were sat at the restaurant and we were kind of asking for advice with regards to children and stuff? And then,
I remember sitting in the restaurant. I don't remember
so
that bit.
You gave us some really good advice about raising children.
Okay.
So I'll remind you of that later. But if you go back to kind of the husband scenario, there's one thing that I found amongst many that was really powerful. And you mentioned kind of keeping the relationship between your mother and your wife good and healthy. And the thing that stuck out to me was that you kind of mentioned that if the man is giving everybody their due rights, there shouldn't really be an issue on the most part, which I think is really, really powerful. And you kind of gave the metaphor from the hadith of keeping the wife's ears drooping with heavy jewelry and the mother's cupboards full. What are the kind of things that a man would need to do to ensure that everyone's kind of at bay and he's giving everyone their due rights?
Yeah. I think this is more than just about marriage. This is something that every Muslim has to live in their whole life. And that is that at any one time, you're going to have multiple people that have rights over you. And you remember the hadith of Salman al-Farisi with Abu Dhar. And he says to him that your Lord has a right over you, and your body has a right over you, and your family has a right over you. So give everyone who has a right over you their right. فَأَعْطِ كُلَّ ذِي حَقٍّ حَقَّهُ. Everyone that's got a right over you needs to have their right. And the thing is that if it were the case in our lives that we just had one person or one thing that we had to give rights to, how easy would that be? You wouldn't have any complications, because the only thing I have to do is give rights to this person and everything will be fine. But reality, in anyone's life at any one time, particularly in married life, but also outside of it, you're going to have multiple people. You're going to have a mother, a father, a wife, or a spouse, children. You're going to have work commitments. You're going to have lots of people that have rights over you.
But can you understand how, from like the layperson's perspective, that can sound very overwhelming? That all of these
daunting.
things and people have rights over
okay,
me.
practically, how do you then? That though it is reality, though, like we have to say, as daunting as it is, and as scary as it might be, you can't get away from the fact that that's the truth. That's the life that we live. That's the life that Allah has made for us, right? So, practical tips. I would say first thing is you've got to learn the rights of each person. You've got to learn. You've got to know what your wife's rights are over you. You've got to learn what your mother's rights are over you. You've got to know what your rights are in terms of the amanat, the responsibilities you take on, maybe at work or whatever. You've got to know what each person's right is. You've got to know the rights of your children. I mean, how many times we talk about the rights of the parents, but we don't talk about the rights of the children. Children have rights over you. So if we know each person's right, that's the first thing. And the second thing you've got to do very practically is evaluate yourself. That's a principle that Islam has had since the earliest time, that each person, وَلْتَنْظُرْ نَفْسٌ مَا قَدَّمَتْ لِغَدْ. Let every person look at what you've put forward for tomorrow. So you've got to know yourself and say, okay, right now, my mum has these rights over me. My wife has these rights over me. How do I stand? Like, am I even fulfilling them? Which ones am I not fulfilling? And you need to evaluate it. And then you need to take the steps in order to try your best to fulfill it. And then finally, you need to be relaxed about the rights that other people have over you, because it's only when you become forgiving of other people falling short with your rights that other people will forgive you for the same, right? So it's like reciprocal in that way. Yeah. If you can become forgiving about people not quite giving you all the rights, and you can be lenient with them and tolerant with them and forgiving, then you'll find that by default, people will become also the same with you, because you're a human being. You're going to fall short from, and you're going to have to ask Allah's forgiveness for that and ask people's forgiveness for that. But people can see when you're working hard. When you're working hard, Allah makes things easy for you. So I think that those are the basic steps when you talk about rights of people. Learn what the rights are, evaluate where you stand and where your biggest problems are. And that's a continual process, right? That's like one of those things where you see it in a circle. You need to keep going around it again and again. Where do I stand? Take some actions to fix some of the things. That can be istighfar, that can be asking, going and saying sorry to somebody and saying, look, I know that I haven't been doing what I should have been doing. Inshallah, I'm gonna make a big effort. And also finally, just being more forgiving with other people about your rights, and that's in a marriage. I think that is one of the greatest things to achieve a happy marriage, is let your own be relaxed and lenient and gentle about your own rights, and let it go. Learn to let things go for yourself, and you're going to see that your wife is going to behave towards you in the same way when she sees how gentle and kind and considerate you are with her. That sometimes she doesn't always, fulfill every right that you have over her. She's a human being. And so you're more relaxed about it, and then she becomes more relaxed and tolerant with you. So it becomes like that process.
When husbands and wives argue, and inevitably all tend to, where do you think kind of the most people go wrong in your experience, in kind of people coming to you and saying that, seeking advice and stuff? We had a guest on about a year ago, Brother Jamal from IERA, and he was talking about how he, is seen kind of in his community as someone that people tend to go to if they're having young couples having kind of marriage issues.
Yeah.
They see him as having like a successful marriage and stuff. And he found that one of the biggest things was a husband and a wife, when they argue, when one owns up and says, you know what, perhaps I was wrong here, and the other one capitalizes off that, says, yeah, you were, and
Yeah.
but to say, oh, you know what, this person, he or she has accepted where perhaps they were wrong. I need to now know to put my guard down and not attack now.
Yeah. So there's a lot. I think I once did a video. I've got a video lecture on this, and if it's interesting, you can even post it in the notes, because it's a lot. But I'll mention 2 or 3. I think number 1, as Muslims, we're always told when you disagree about something, go back to Allah and His Messenger. And that's not just about fiqh issues. It's not just about when you disagree about whether you should pray like this or like that you go back to the Quran and the Sunnah. When you have an argument, you go back to it. And what that means is that if I want to know if I'm right or wrong in an argument, I have to have a judge. I have to have something that's going to judge between me and my wife in what we're arguing about. And the more you can make that the Quran and the Sunnah, that's the first thing. So, if I'm arguing like, oh, you don't spend enough time with me, or you're not there for me when I need you, I want to go back to the Quran and the Sunnah and say, well, what does Islam say about that? What does Islam say about the amount of time you should spend or shouldn't spend? Where's the limit in Islam? And then maybe I need to adjust my expectations. If Islam is allowing my wife to do something and I'm not happy with it, maybe I need to look at myself and readjust my expectations about what I expect from the marriage. So that's about rights and things like that. The second thing is not using Islam as a stick to beat your spouse with. That's so common. That's related to what you said, to be honest. It's really common. And that includes taking advantage of someone in the argument, and but someone comes and says, yeah, I think I've been looking at things and I think I made a mistake. See, I told you, or the person starts to use, Allah has placed men responsible over women, and He's using that as a proverbial stick to beat his wife with. He's basically having a go at her, and he's using Islam, and that's not sincere.
And it almost comes across like emotionally abusive to make someone feel guilt. Right?
Exactly, but the problem is when you use Islam that way, it's not sincere. You're not sincerely trying to help them to practice Islam in a better way, and for yourself to practice Islam in a better way. So why are we learning Islam in the first place? Like Imam Ahmad said, "And tamu yaratha jahrin an nafsika wa an ghayrik." The reason you're learning Islam is to remove ignorance from your own self, and to help other people to remove ignorance from themselves. That's why we learn Islam, because we recognize that in ourselves we've got faults and flaws and mistakes. We're trying to get rid of them, and we want to try and help other people to do the same. But when you start making Islam that stick that you have a go at someone and you use it as an argument to win points in an argument, you bring in something from Islam into it, and you're not being honest, you're not looking at the whole picture, and it's not a sincere effort to help someone to be a better Muslim, that for me, it's not sincere, and that's another thing that makes a lot of people argue as well. And the other thing is the third one I was going to mention is looking at your own mistakes and being sincere with Allah about your own self before you're looking at those of the other person. I feel that is a big thing, and that's a state of mind. It's not about one argument, but just generally your thing is that, look, it's not about whether my wife was right or wrong in a particular argument, but it's more about, I have to admit that I am a person who has mistakes, and I have to admit I'm a person that falls short in my marital responsibilities towards my wife. I've got to admit that. If I don't have that mentality, then every time we get in an argument, my mentality would be, I'm the one who's really good, I'm the one who's perfect, I'm the one who's practicing properly, and you're not. And that will never ever lead to reconciling things. Last one I mentioned, right? Practical tip. I mentioned it yesterday, I think, is that if you want to have a discussion about Islam and about rights and about, maybe some shortcomings, have it when the two of you are in a good mood with each other. Don't try and have a detailed discussion about your marriage and your responsibilities when you're having an argument. Because the argument typically is really, if you're having an argument, you've got to the point where you're just trying to kind of have a dig at the other person. And that's not a great time to sit down and say, I think you should be spending more time at home, for example. Yeah. Like when you're both shouting at each other and you're this and and I'm upset with you and I'm not going to talk to you. That's not a great time to be having that discussion. The best time, if you want to really make changes or you want your spouse to make changes, is to chat to them when you guys are you're happy with each other, you're in a friendly situation, you're both having a good day, and you sit down and say, you know, there's something I wanted to ask you about, but I didn't want to argue about it. I just wanted to talk to you about it. And you think about this. And generally, because you're both having a good day, you're both really happy with each other, both of you are a lot more understanding of each other and a lot more considerate and a lot more willing to overlook things, and you don't take it to heart, and changes happen. Whereas if you try and have those discussions when you're fighting with each other, that's usually when things, things don't go as well. That's some ideas anyway.
Let me put forward kind of a scenario that perhaps is something that that people might face, and that's a scenario where two people get married, husband and wife, and in that marriage, perhaps they've even had kids, but in that marriage, one of them, the husband or the wife, end up falling in love with the deen, right, the religion, and they actually start taking it a lot more seriously than they had in the past. But they are now with their life partner, who they love, who they're not willing to just kind of throw away the relationship. With all of that comes with it, and with this person having known that person prior to their seriousness about faith, how does that person now, how does he or she give that nasiha or make the spouse, try and get the spouse to fall in love with the religion like they have, and with the baggage of the fact that they have the kids, and it sounds like a very messy scenario. If people are in that case right now, what would you advise those people? Have you ever come across an issue where someone has asked you for that kind of advice?
That's really normal. I think that's something that happens all the time, because it's quite rare that the husband and wife both find that at exactly the same time, at exactly the same level. And I think one of the evidences of that is that we're told in paradise that a wife will be raised up. If her husband is above her in paradise, she'll be raised up to his level. And if she's above him in paradise, he'll be raised up to her level as an honor for the two of them. That shows you that it's very rare that husband and wife are on the same level in terms of iman at exactly the same time. It can happen, but it's not very, very common that you get this disparity. And sometimes it's really big, like someone just started practicing and the other one's not really practicing at all. So some things I think are really important. I think, first of all, the one who started practicing needs to see their responsibility to be to help their spouse, not to have a go at them. It's not about that I've changed and you haven't. It's more like, okay, how can I get you now to experience this sweetness of Iman? Iman has a sweetness, right?
Sure.
Iman is very sweet. It's sweeter than anything. It has a halal, it's sweetness. And if you want them to taste that sweetness, then it's the shafaqah. I don't know, like, it's that really caring about them. It's that real care for a person. That should be what's motivating you. Even generally, the way you deal with non-practicing Muslims should be one of care, a way of, like, your motivating thing should be care and consideration. And I really want this person to taste the sweetness of Iman. And I want to be better. And I recognize where I came from. I recognize that I wasn't born a Muslim, at least in terms of the way my parents raised me. Born upon the fitrah, but my parents raised me as a non-Muslim. I accepted Islam, and when I first accepted Islam, I wasn't practicing Islam, and I started practicing maybe 3-4 years after I became Muslim. So for me, if I can't remember what that was like, and I can't remember the grace of Allah and the blessing of Allah that made me change and made me become something that is better than I was right there, I think ultimately it's only by remembering that I can actually reach out to somebody and help them. And a spouse should be even easier, because it should be somebody that you have that love for anyway. So it's really easy for you to have that care for them and really want them to change. So it's going to take patience. And I think that it's really important people don't see it as a short-term thing. That, look, I've told them 3 times, 4 times now. How long did it take you, the person who's saying that, how long did it take you to start practicing? I say for me, 3 years, maybe even 4 years. And how could I then expect that person that a week or a day or 3 times or 4 times when it took me 3 to 4 years? You see what I mean?
Yeah. How do you, if we look at that as a construct in itself, this idea of your general behavior and generally the way you speak, if we delve in a bit deeper, what about the micro conversations, like the actual things, like I'm passionate, I'm really strong about this exact thing changing? How do you have those direct conversations?
So what I think is, first of all, is you have to understand that the thing that made this particular person change, this particular spouse, like let's say the thing that made the husband change, isn't necessarily the same point or the same inspiration that's going to make the wife change necessarily, right? People have different things, different sins they're attracted to. Different, their nafs is different, the soul is different. People have different personalities. So we have to understand generally what makes a person guided. What makes anybody get guidance from Allah. And there's some things that you can see are true for everyone. And one is definitely knowing Allah. The more you know Allah, the more you love Allah, and the more you love Allah, the more you worship Allah. That's how the process goes. And so sometimes what we neglect is we're trying to give that, in that micro conversation, I'm trying to give the same exact thing that inspired me to start practicing. Whereas maybe I need to step back and be more general and start saying, like, maybe I just need to attach their heart to Allah and increase their love of Allah. And that in itself will help them to grow. But part of it is the skills involved in da'wah generally. And part of that is knowing the person. And that should be true for the spouses. The two should know each other really well. But sometimes you sometimes can't see the wood for the trees because you're so much into that little micro conversation. You can't step back and say, what does this person really need? And so I give small things I always recommend people to do. If a person everybody has some good deeds that they love. I'm gonna say we're talking about two Muslims here. We're talking about two people, husband and wife. They're both Muslim. And the wife has started to practice more, the husband's a little bit lagging behind. He's going to have some good deeds that he does. Encourage them, help him to do them. Because at the end of the day, those few things are going to just put those extra seeds of iman in his heart, going to increase that love in Allah, going to just bring him towards practicing that a little bit more. And again, it's important to choose the time with these micro conversations, these small topics you raise up. Choose the timings. Because if you choose the wrong timing, sometimes it's not that your message was wrong, but you just picked the wrong time and the wrong way to say it. So it's really important to just go really slowly and to take the right time, take things in small chunks and focus on what's important. How many people focus on something which is, it is big. Like, for example, and I didn't want to give too many specific examples because I think it might polarize people in a way, but just to give an example. We're talking about hijab, for example. Hijab's important. We all know how important the hijab is in Islam. We all know how valuable it is and how much a part of Islam it is. But for example, if there are other things before that have an even higher priority, and if those things are not there, sometimes the husband just, focusing on that single one thing, which we know why he is. We know that it's out of love, it's out of care, it's out of ghira, it's out of protective jealousy. But the problem is that just having that one thing again and again and again might be neglecting that there's things missing in terms of knowing Allah, in terms of prayers, in terms of basic, understanding of what Islam actually is and what it means to be a Muslim. That might be the reason why that lady isn't taking that step on that one thing that her husband wants her to take that step on. So sometimes you do, if you've tried, and that doesn't mean don't try. It's tried and it's just not working. Sometimes you just have to step back and say, let me see this from a broader picture. Why? What is the problem? And you might find there are a lot of things that are influencing that behavior from the outside that you can make a lot of progress on rather than having to just pick on that one particular issue all the time.
Do you think asking questions helps? Because we're so prone to kind of telling, but sometimes not saying, what do you think about X, so you can understand the person's mindset.
Yeah, it's really important. I think generally this is a principle of da'wah in general, like calling people to Islam or calling people to starting to practice Islam. One of the things is you've got to know the person you're speaking to, and if you don't know or you feel like you're not sure, you have to ask. And the other thing about asking questions is it endears the person to you, right? The person starts feeling really, they really care, they really ask me, they're not presuming things. Like, for example, if you see a person and you just meet somebody on the street and you look at them and they're not what you would expect, or you think they're not where they should be in terms of their Islam. That's just what you've seen from the outside. It doesn't look right. Looks like they need some help. That presumption of that it's because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and just jumping in there is likely to cause you more problems than it is good, right? So you have to ask the person, and you have to take time to listen as well, not just to be the one who's right. You ask the question, you let them give a 10-second answer, and then you dive in with your point. It's like to be able to listen. And I think one of the profound things that we got from the hadith that we did of Zara yesterday was the action of the way the Prophet ﷺ listened to Aisha tell that whole story, and then he made a very small comment at the end, just a little point at the end. That's a really good habit, being able to listen. I think that's one of the things that builds a successful marriage, just being able to listen to your spouse. And that's not just not talking, but actually being able to listen and think about what they're saying and reflect on it. And, being a person who doesn't speak too quickly as well. Sometimes we speak very quickly. Usually, when we speak very quickly, we usually regret it later on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, kind of being erratic in any way is kind of a dangerous path to go down, right? Like kind of like making decisions quickly or
true
emotionally jump into conclusions.
That's true.
I do want to go off the topic of like this idea of like a husband and wife not kind of agreeing with each other, but there is one part of it that I am intrigued by, and that's when children come into the mix. If I can imagine it being such a difficult process if they have different ideas of how the child should be raised, or different priorities of what's important or what's permissible for the child. How is that to be kind of approached?
So I mentioned something yesterday that I would love to share with everyone who's listening. I think it's really, really important. And that is that ideally, marital problems should be completely contained between husband and wife. And they should even be contained away from the kids as much as possible. So your children ideally shouldn't know or see that there's any problem between mum and dad. That's in an ideal sense. Now, I know there's times that's not practical, but it should be our standard that we aspire to. It shouldn't be that we aspire to, sometimes we say keep it within the four walls of the house. But in all honesty, in an Islamic sense, it's more about keeping it within, the small space that's between husband and wife. And that's why even when some of the scholars commented on the ayah, وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ, that abandon them in their bed, some of them said it just means for him to turn around, or for her to turn around. Some of the scholars said this is for men and women.
Okay, yeah.
That it just means to just turn around. Because if you go sleep on the sofa, your kids start to know that mum and dad are not getting on.
Of course.
Or if it's like a big thing that, why is dad sleeping on the sofa? Why is mum moved out and gone back to her parents' house? It affects the kids massively. And husband and wife are going to fight. But I tell you one thing that I always think is really profound. Husband and wife have an inbuilt ability to forgive each other. Allah placed mawadda and rahmah, affection and mercy between husband and wife in a way that it's an ayah from the ayat of Allah. It's a sign, it's a miracle from the miracles of Allah, the way that Allah put affection and love between husband and wife. They have an ability to forgive each other and overlook each other's faults that other people who are external to that relationship don't have. So what happens? You get the mother-in-law involved, father-in-law gets involved, kids get involved. They don't have that same ability and that same gift from Allah to be able to overlook and forgive. So problems last much longer than they need to. Husband and wife have let it go, but the mother hasn't let it go. The father hasn't let it go. The kids might even be affected by it. If they're young, it might just be an effect where they feel sad about it. They don't feel, they feel that mum and dad don't get on, or they feel unsettled in themselves or insecure in themselves. If they're older, the kids might even be involved and be like, I'm on mum's side, I'm on dad's side. It's so important to try and contain those issues so that the husband and the wife, the only people who really know what's going on is them, and everybody else might see the odd thing, but it's not on public display. And so when we talk about the kids, that's the first thing. And the second thing is that if we look at rights, the rights of husband and wife, and that's one issue, but the rights towards the children, that's a totally different issue. So the fact that a husband and wife are arguing shouldn't mean that those children are somehow, their rights are somehow less important or not worthy of being fulfilled. And if both husband and wife see that they have a responsibility towards those children, they would work together for the interests of their children, even if they had a lot of problems between one another, or even if there's some feelings of hatred or feelings of problems between husband and wife. They both see that we have a shared responsibility to look after our kids, and so they work like that. And I also think that it's really important that if we implement the Islamic family structure, like in terms of the husband's roles, the wife's roles, the children's roles, generally it's easier then to manage the children in a way where the children get a consistent answer to things. But when we go away from the Islamic system and everyone's doing their own thing, and the mum is like a completely independent person who's doing her own thing, the father's a completely independent person, doesn't consult his wife, doesn't have any, and he's doing his own thing, that leads to the children seeing the husband and wife as two totally separate. You know, mum is one thing, dad is another.
Do you think that comparison can take a part in this as well, and kind of the concept of lowering the gaze, even in the even when saying like, oh, but so and so they manage their child like this, or he's taken her to this, or she's done this for him, and just constantly comparing in any way, whether that be comparing relationships, comparing parenting, or anything. It seems like it always comes back to the idea of comparisons are very dangerous.
I agree. I think it's really, it's not helpful, because ultimately whatever steps you take to help your kids to, you know, because you want good for your kids, whatever steps you take to help your kids to be good and to help them to be successful in this dunya, in the akhirah, if it's not going to produce the desired result, then it's not Islamic. Because if it's not, if it's literally, if you know you're going to make things worse, and generally speaking, those comparisons, they make things worse. They don't help. And that brings me, you know, kind of reminds me of the hadith, min husni islam al-mar, tarkuhu ma la yani, from the perfection of a person's faith is they leave things that don't concern them. And comparing your kids to other people's kids, or comparing your relationships to other people's relationships, is something that really doesn't concern you, because you really don't know the reality of it, and it just leads to either jealousy, or it leads to ill feeling, or it leads to the child feeling always undervalued, you know, that the parents don't really value them. You know, you're not as good as this person's child. You haven't got the results of this person's child. And it's a horrible feeling for the child that doesn't inspire them to work harder. It doesn't make them feel like, oh, I should change. It doesn't produce any positive effect at all. And so for that, if your idea of fixing a problem is to bring about a bigger problem, then Islamically, that's not how Islam sees that we should approach a particular issue.
So I'll go back to the advice now that you gave us when we first met.
All right. Okay.
And
I hope it was good.
It was the advice of when raising children, there's like, do it in sevens.
Okay, yeah.
You know the advice.
Yeah, I remember now, yeah.
So essentially, well, why don't you explain it?
Okay, so as far as I know, I haven't come across this as a hadith.
You
so
mentioned
as a disclaimer, right? I haven't come
that.
across it as a hadith. But it's a principle that I think is pretty accurate, Islamically speaking. And it has evidence. If you look back at Islam, you can actually find evidences that it seems to be pretty accurate. And that is that you split the life of your child, or you see the life of your child as 3 phases. 7 years, 7 to 14 years, 14 plus. That's not strictly speaking. It's not like 7 on the dot, I change.
Yeah.
But the idea is, broadly speaking, that you see the life of your child as being in 3 phases. Dad,
your personality has completely changed me since I turned 7.
Yeah.
Who are you now? Son, this is the new dad for the next 7 years.
Yes. Not like that, but that you broadly understand that the life of a child works like that.
Sure.
The first 7 years is all about play. It's all about showing your love and affection and care, and it's, you know, you're teaching them through playing with them and spending time with them and stuff like that. The second 7 years is all about education. Now that doesn't mean you stop playing with them and stop being there for them, but now they're at a phase where they're able to understand right and wrong, and they're building up their values about who they are, their personality, what they think is right and wrong, and what they like and what they don't. So it's really, that's a phase where the main focus is education. And I don't want to use the word discipline because it has negative connotation, but if you understand what I mean by discipline, like, you know, teaching them morals and values and what's right and what's wrong. Of course you taught that as in the first 7 years, but up to there, they probably didn't have the ability to really, they learned it by example. They learned it by you playing with them, and by when I look at my dad, he doesn't tell lies. But it's when they get to that age between 7 and 14 that's their main age of education. That's the time when they take the most in terms of taking from you. So they're learning, sort of learning in a bit more of a formal, a bit more of a structured way. And then once they get to adulthood, which most people will get to at 14 or 15, they become an adult. You really can't educate them in the same way. They still learn from you, but it's more about companionship and just being there and being a friend for them, being there for them, you know, being a shoulder to cry on, being someone who, even when they mess things up and they, you know, they do things wrong, you're still there for them, you listen to them, you help them get out of it, and you become more like a friend than a teacher. So in the first 7 years, you're more of a, I don't know if the word is a playmate, you know, someone who plays with them. In the second 7 years, you're more of a teacher. And in the last 7 years onwards, you're more of a friend. I think that has a lot of evidences Islamically when you break it down, even though that in that form, it doesn't come in a hadith. But I personally find it's very, very true, and it works really well. And it answers a lot about problems people go through, like, why is it that I can't educate my 16-year-old son, or he's gone off the rails and he's not doing what I tell him to do? Because you're trying an approach for an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old on someone who's 16. That's why it doesn't work, because you're treating that 16-year-old as though he was a 10-year-old. And so the approach doesn't work. It's not that you can't tell him what to do, but it's that you need to tell him in a different way and take a different approach, broadly speaking, because he's an adult now and his way of looking at the world is different. So I think that's very profound and really useful in terms of parenting.
What would you say are some of the key things that people get wrong when it comes to parenting, or some like regular mistakes people would make?
I think the first thing is that people might think parenting begins at 7, 8, 9 years old. That's the biggest one I see. What I mean by that is, when the child is, first of all, before the child's born, they don't see that they have responsibilities as parents until the child's born. And then when the child's born, they're very relaxed, you know, like what I let my children do or not do. They're still young, it doesn't matter. And then they get to 6, 7 years old and, they're still young, but, you know, maybe start to take things a little bit more seriously. Whereas I believe that if you were to start your responsibilities as a parent and see them as starting even before the child is conceived, let alone before the child is born, then a lot of the problems in parenting, a lot of the difficulties, inshallah, they wouldn't happen. So even before the child is conceived, that choosing the right spouse, learning your responsibilities as a parent before they happen to you, you know, the etiquettes of how to be with your wife and how to have a good marital relationship, which are going to be so important for that child, because when the children come into play, it gets more complicated. Your marriage becomes more complicated. You know, things become more significant. You're at a stage where you've taken your marriage to a new level of commitment also. So getting the marriage settled, they're all things that are part of parenting. And then also, when the child is born, seeing that my responsibilities to bring them up as a good Muslim start from right away. You know, they start right away. And then that changes your perspective on things. A lot of people let their children do things that are haram because they're really little. And the problem is that the child forms most of their feelings and opinions and likes and dislikes at a very, very young age. If we just look at child psychology, it's not my area of expertise, but just from an Islamic point of view, how many children form most of their likes and dislikes at the very, very young age, extremely young age. So if we're for example, allowing our children to listen to things, watch things, do things that we wouldn't allow them to do at 10 years old, but we allow them to do it at 2 years old or 3 years old, ultimately we're just making things difficult for ourselves, because when it comes to 10 years old, we're not able to change those bad habits that they've built up. So this brings me to a really, really interesting thing about parenting. Why is it that we give so much attention to children doing the right thing at an age where they're not responsible? It's really interesting to think about it. Why teach a child to pray before 7 years old and then tell them to pray when they're 7 years old, Hijri? You know, they probably haven't even reached 7 in terms of their Gregorian birth date. They haven't reached 7 years old yet, and we're telling them pray. That child, if they pray or don't pray, I mean, they're not going to earn any sin. Nothing bad is going to happen to them. It's all about the habits. It's that if they can build the habit of praying from 7 years old, and then the discipline comes at 10 years old, where if they're not praying, they're going to get told off, they're going to get grounded, they're going to get things taken away from them. by the time they actually have to pray, which is 14, 15, maybe 13, depends on the, different biological factors and things like that. But let's just say 14 years old, they've had that habit for 7 years. For 7 years, they've been praying 5 times a day, give or take, odd prayer here or there, for 7 years before it became obligatory for them to do. Look at the habits we set in the child. It's the same thing. Why do you tell your children not to lie when they're not sinful for lying? If they lie, they don't get a sin for it. Because if we teach them to lie at a young age, they're going to develop that habit. And when they get to 14 or 15 years old, they're going to then have a habit that they can't break. And we're going to then complain and say, oh, my children aren't truthful and they don't tell me the truth. When in reality, we set that up by teaching them that it was okay at 3 years old and 4 years old and 5 years old. So to me, it is haram to let your children to lie because of what it leads to. And it's haram for you, of course, allowing something wrong, but because of what it leads to for them when they're 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. So for me, I think a parent seeing it as what I allow my 2-year-old to do is going to define what they do at 22 years old or 12 years old or 18 years old or whatever.
I remember posing the question to someone saying, how do you get your child to fall in love with the Quran? Because as we know as adults, it's a book of miracles. That no other book can you read and you can get shifa as you're reading it, or you have a problem and as you read it your problems get solved. And a lot of us, as we get older, we experience those things. When we read it, we experience the miracles of the Quran, but a child perhaps won't. So I posed that question. I said, how do you get your child to fall in love with the Quran? And his reply was, well, children value what they see their parents value. And so if he was to see that his father was always reading the Quran or his mother always reading the Quran, they would see the value of that book. Like they would almost go and pick it up from the shelf and say, you haven't read your Quran today.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, I have sometimes seen as well parents who perhaps aren't as focused on or kind of like leading with their Islam, where they're not as passionate about parts of their Islam, but when they have children, they really want their children to be practicing. So they like as soon as a child is born, they're on the waiting list for the madrasa. As soon as and they're really proud if their child has like already completed become a hafiz or even at a younger stage perhaps. They're proud that the child knows the adhan or knows how to say the shahada, the shahada. But themselves, they're not practicing it. Where's the danger in that? And do you have you experienced that as well?
Yeah, see, the thing is that even we could be talking about something voluntary, like memorizing a lot of the Quran. Like we agree, memorizing a lot of the Quran is voluntary, right? You're not sinful if you haven't memorized Surah Al-Baqarah. It's an extra part of your iman. It's a wonderful thing. So we see a parent who maybe has memorized small surahs, which is obligatory for them. They can pray now. They know how to pray properly. They can read Quran in the prayer, and they read from the Mus'haf from time to time. So they're doing what they have to do, but they want their child to do so much more. They want the child to be hafiz, or they want the child to memorize, certain number of juz of the Quran, at least 5, or they want the child to. I dream of my child memorizing Surah Al-Baqarah. That's a beautiful thing. So the thing here is, it's really, really important for the child, especially at a very young age, especially below the age of education, where we said that educational phase, the child has to have role models. And if you want your child to go forward in that thing, and you have to sort of go some of that way with them. Of that way.
I want to pause you there because you mentioned kind of if a parent is doing X, Y, Z, but they want their child to go further. My question kind of also relates to if a parent, for example, doesn't keep up with their 5 prayers a day, doesn't wake up for Fajr, but then they're so proud of their child when their child, for example, memorizes.
So that too. That's another aspect.
Fine.
That's more that in that case we can be more pushy with the parent and say, you're not doing what Allah has commanded you to do.
Sure.
And so, we need now to fix this. And I think in that case, what I think is really important is that the parent is honest with the child. Like, it can't be that, look, don't ask me why I don't pray, or, it has to be, they have to be honest with the child when the child's a bit older and say, look, I know that I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And the reason I'm telling you to do it is how much I want you to not fall into the mistakes that I'm making. That, if it's a mistake, that's really important, that the parent is honest. And that happens when the parents change also, when the parent starts practicing in the middle of the child's life and the child gets really confused. Why is it that we used to be able to do all these things and now you're telling me I can't do them? I think the simple answer to that is just to be honest with the child and say, especially if they're old enough to understand your honesty, and say, yeah, I wasn't doing the right thing and I've made changes in my life and I want you to make them because of how much I love you and I care for you and stuff like that. So it's really important for children to have role models in general. The reason I give the example of the Quran is just to give an example where the parent's not doing anything wrong. It doesn't have to be always that the parent's doing something wrong, but just that the parent wants the child to go so much further. Is so important for the parent to do a number of things. Number one, to try and go some of that way with the child. Even if it's about praying, to at least start the obligatory prayers. And even if they want the child to do the sunnahs and the nawafil and the extra prayers, but at least go some of the way with the child, because the child, when the parent's holding their hand and taking them to do it, it's so much more powerful. Love is such a powerful emotion. And love is one of the main emotions that makes you want to do what the person you love does. That's why when you love Allah more than anything else, you want to obey Allah more than anyone else, because of how much you love Allah. And when you love your parents, you want to do what your parents love. So when you see your parents loving the prayer and encouraging you to pray, you want to do that, but you have to see, you have to see a little bit, because naturally we as human beings really struggle when someone tells us to do something that they don't do. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm going to say a message to all parents in that situation. It is better for you to tell your child to do something you don't do than not to tell them at all. It's definitely better. So if we say a parent doesn't pray, should they let their child not pray, or should they tell their child to pray? We say the best thing is you start praying and your kids start praying. But if you're still struggling, at least tell your kids to pray. That's better. But we as human beings, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us, كَبُرَ مَقْعَةً عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَن تَقُولُوا مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. That's a big thing in the sight of Allah, that you say things you don't do, because human beings struggle with that. We really struggle when someone says pray and they don't pray. We find it hard to accept, and we naturally rebel, like, well, you don't pray, why should I pray? That's why it's so important. So the parents with the children, I would say that's one of the big things when you've got to go a little bit of the way with the child. But another thing that's really important is you've got to help your child to love Islam. And I think when it comes to the Quran, anything to do with Islam, you've got to help your child to love Allah and love Islam. And too many parents put a little bit too much discipline, a little bit too much pressure sometimes. We're not talking about pressure to do obligatory deeds, because you have to pray. The Prophet ﷺ said to discipline your child. If after 10 years old, Hijri, they're not praying 5 times a day, then you have to discipline them. You have to take things away from them, or you have to implement some kind of punishment system, or some kind of thing that's taken away from them if they're not doing that. But just generally, one of the things I see, because I work with a lot of kids, I do story time for little children. I love it. Well, I have to admit, my favorite class that I do, out of all the classes that I do, is the classes we do for nursery age children. Wow. I just love it, because I'm a big kid also, and I love sitting in front of the kids and
Is
doing
it English speaking?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we do it. We do stories of the Prophet, stories from the Seerah, stories from history, with kids who are like 5 years old, 6 years old, and it's just, I absolutely love it. I love it so much. But you've got to make your kids love Islam. If Islam is really dry and really, you're just all the time telling them about what they can't do, and you're all the time pushing them and pressurizing them to go further, but there's never that love and that raghba and that, what's the word, that encouragement to do good for your kids, and encouragement for them to want to get Jannah and love Allah and to hope in Allah's reward, and to know all the wonderful things that will happen to them when they start practicing Islam. Without that, it's very, very hard to keep your children motivated. And ultimately, what I sadly see is there's some kids who grow up to really dislike Islam And I don't mean dislike Islam on a fundamental level, that they don't want to be Muslim anymore, though that's a problem as well. But they grow up to just have this negativity around practicing Islam, or, my Quran. Parents take the kids to a Quran class, teacher's got a big stick, and, it doesn't happen as much in our time, but it used to, the kids getting rapped on the knuckles every time he makes a mistake. Do you then think a child's going to graduate from that in this day and age and love the Quran? You think that a child's going to... For me, I don't see, for most children, getting a rap on the knuckles every time they make a mistake. Yeah, some children have reacted well. It was done in the past. But I think in this day and age, that for most children, what's going to happen is they're going to grow up with a dislike of reading the Quran and a dislike of memorizing the Quran because of the bad experiences they've had learning it. So that's really important.
Speaking on that, I am conscious of your time, Ustad, as well. So
you're...
Speaking on that, you mentioned, again, I think it was in the first podcast episode that we did together in Dubai, that you're seeing a wave, and this was then, which was obviously I think like 2 years ago now, that you were seeing a wave of emergency cases where children or young people, were growing up and they were planning to leave Islam, or they were on the verge of leaving Islam, which surprised me because, and I'm very much aware that this was because of my circle. On my end, I feel like I'm seeing a generation shift of young people falling in love with the pure Islam and with and kind of moving away from what's been taught by elder generations. And I am kind of here speaking more about the Asian community, in that perhaps the generation above our parents' generation, like our grandparents' generation, they came over here and perhaps still brought along a lot of kind of cultural side to things, which in many ways is beautiful. And therefore, kind of the generation above us kind of like neglected that completely because they were disciplined in a really negative way. And then our generation are now able to, because we haven't got the cultural pressure, we're able to kind of find that pure Islam. And so that's kind of the angle that I've seen things from. Again, probably because of the circle that I'm around. So are you still seeing that wave of young people perhaps wanting to leave the religion, or are you seeing more people perhaps finding kind of true and pure Islam?
I think it's a cycle. It's a mix. There's a flow. There's a flow in and a flow out. And Allah told us about it, that if you neglect the laws of the rules, and you neglect Allah and you neglect His religion, He's going to replace you with another group of people. And يَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ. He's going to take a people who are not you, and He's going to replace them with you. So that means that there's always a process of Allah Azza wa Jal replacing people who are, neglecting it with people who aren't. And I think I've seen wonderful things of people coming to Islam, people wanting to practice Islam, people having a love for Islam. Whenever you see a young person who's got a love for Islam, that's just one of the most beautiful things, because you see somebody who's, despite that they're young, they've got their whole life in front of them, they've got so many options to do things that are not right, and they choose to limit themselves to what Islam allows them. That's a really beautiful, beautiful thing. And that's why one of the people who will be shaded under the shade of the throne of Allah when there's no shade except His is shabun nasha'a fi ta'atillah, a young person who grew up obeying Allah. That's lovely to see that happening among people. But it's also important for us to be realistic and see that there is another side to that. And there are a lot of our young people who are getting further and further away from Islam, doubts, confusion about how relevant Islam is to them, confusion about things they've been taught in school, not being able to reconcile between the world that they live in and between what Islam tells them. That's still a really, really big problem.
Do you encourage doubts, or would you not, in the sense that if someone has a question that's quite like a deep question, would you encourage it so that you can answer it?
So I would never encourage doubt, but always encourage questions. Okay. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I would never encourage someone to doubt Islam, or to have doubts about Islam, or to entertain the doubts about Islam and let them grow in their heart. Because if they grow to a certain point, they'll grow to a point where the person leaves Islam completely. But I do believe that it's important that people can ask a sensible question and get a really good answer. And a lot of the young people I've seen who are struggling with Islam, the problem is that they've had questions about Islam, and really deep questions about Islam. And they've asked them to people who weren't able to answer. And it reminds me of the hadith of the man who killed 99 people. And then, he's just killed 99 people. And he goes to a worshipper, an abid, like somebody who just prays a lot. And he says, I've killed 99 people. Can I repent? And he says, no, there's no repentance to you. So he kills him, makes it 100. Then when he goes to the scholar who has the answer says, of course you can repent. You just need to go to this, leave your town and go to a different town, associate with a different group of people. And he does that and Allah enters him into Jannah. That just shows you how dangerous it can be if you don't get someone who can answer your question correctly. And I think if young people have got, or any people really have got doubts about Islam, real concerns, things where they can't reconcile between their life and between Islam, or between what they see around them or the values they've taken from their society or from their schooling or whatever, and they can't reconcile between that and Islam, they need to ask that question to someone who can give them an answer, not to someone who's either going to give them a half-baked answer and tell them, don't ask, or give them an answer that I used to think this only came in Christianity. This answer of this is a matter of faith and, you just need to be quiet and just be quiet and don't ask anything about it. And when I found that happening in Islam, I was shocked that people give this answer. An imam would say to a young person that don't ask about this. It's not in your, just leave it and get on with your life. And then that grows and grows. And what happens is you get this perfect storm that happens because of you've got doubts and then you've got desires. And your doubts and your desires come together. Your desires, you're craving to do things that are not really right and you want to go off the rails a little bit, and you kind of start to enjoy that, and your doubts fuel it because you're starting to think, well, I'm not really convinced it was right anyway. And what I find with people who are thinking of leaving Islam or who've left Islam is that what really made them leave Islam in the first place is their desires. They got emotionally, something happened to them on an emotional level, it wasn't logic. They didn't sit there and think about, logically that Islam doesn't make sense. It was emotional. But then they started having doubts they couldn't get answers to because that emotional thing rocked them. They got really scared and they got really shaken by it. And then they started to get doubts, and the doubts didn't get answered. They then fuel the emotions and the desires, and that then fuels the doubts. And in the end, you end up with someone who seems to have like a mountain of doubts about everything to do with Islam, when in reality it probably started from just an emotional response to a bad situation, which was then followed by the problem of not having answers to questions and not having someone just give them good advice and be able to just answer the issues they had. And people believing that there's so many questions they don't have answers to. In reality, every sensible question that anyone could ever ask about Islam has an answer. Because that's why our religion is complete. Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum. Today I completed your religion for you. Because everything that is a set, there are some questions that the question doesn't make sense. That you have to say to the person, I think the problem is not the answer, the problem is the question. You ask the question in a way that you've made it that you can't give an answer to it. It's one of those trick questions that whichever way you answer it, it's going to be negative. But as long as the question's asked sincerely and it's a fairly sensible question, Islam's got an answer for it. So I think I encourage people to ask questions.
I regularly think about the dua of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ya muqallib al-qulub thabbit qalbi ala dinik. The fact that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked Allah to keep his heart firm on the deen, I think about it so much because I can never be at that level, and to know that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam would ask that of Allah, it kind of makes you worried that I need to ensure that I'm keeping on top of this, making that because you could at times feel like I'm good.
That's it.
Right.
So I think in this there's something one of the biggest confusions people have is qadr, right? And issues relating to guidance and misguidance. That's one of the things that I can almost say that I've never met an atheist or generally, somebody who's struggling with belief in God, agnostic, who didn't have issues around guidance, misguidance, and why bad things happen and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
That's one of the most common things that people have. And this is related to this, that if you understand this dua that you just mentioned, this dua, that O turner of the hearts, keep my heart firm on your religion, you understand a few things. You understand, first of all, that you need Allah for guidance. You can't just be guided by your own efforts and your own, your own attempts. You need Allah. And so you really become a slave of Allah in the real meaning of the word, real servitude, because you actually recognize how desperately you need Allah to keep you in the right path. And then you come to realize something else. You come to realize that Allah has promised to help the people that work hard. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. The people who work hard for us and strive for us, we're going to guide them to our paths, out to our way. And so you realize that not only are you in desperate need of Allah and you can't achieve guidance for yourself and you can't be helped and you can't get things right and you can't stay on the right path without Allah's help, you then realize that on top of that, Allah has promised that help to people that work hard and strive hard and do their best. So that leads you to actually think, you know what it is? From this whole concept of qadr, I've taken two things, very practical. Number one, I'm in desperate need of Allah. And number two, I best start working as hard as I can. And that's, if you understood that from the concept of decree and why things happen, if that's what you took from it, you've understood it completely correctly. And if you took from it this feeling of defeatism, that I'm just doesn't matter what I do, I'm defeated, or this feeling that I feel lazy, I don't want to do anything, or you took from it this idea that you yourself just, you just need to get your own things right or whatever, and it doesn't matter, or that you don't feel that need of Allah. If you took any of those things, you just haven't understood the concept. It hasn't been understood correctly. So I always found that very helpful, that you gotta realize your need of Allah, and you realize what it means to be a servant, what it means to be in just completely, utterly dependent upon Allah for everything. And then you realize that Allah has promised to help the people who work hard, and so you feel a need to work really, really hard. And then you realize that if you put those two together, because if you just worked hard but you didn't feel you needed Allah, you'd be like those people who just think that everything's in their own hands, right? And they just work and work and work and work, and they say, why haven't I achieved it? And then they become upset with themselves, and then maybe they go away from religion.
Another thing that I sometimes catch myself on, kind of that relates to that, is sometimes things will happen and I'll think to myself, what an amazing coincidence. And then it's a great time to remind myself that nothing is ever a coincidence, and that nothing breathes, nothing moves without Allah's permission. And then you realize that not only was that not a coincidence, but it was Allah who structured all of your timing in that way for that thing to fall on. That's just a regular thought that happens.
And I'm going to add something to that there's another step beyond that, which is completely true what you said. And that is, if Allah is so merciful and so kind, will Allah ever decree something for you that's not the best chance for you to get Jannah? Will Allah not always give you the best opportunities in your life that are suited to you, be it calamities or, like bad things or good things? But Allah Azza wa Jal will only ever decree for you in your life the best opportunities to get Jannah.
Wow.
Because Allah is so merciful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will only give it that for you. He's only going to decree for you the best opportunities for you to get parity. Be that a calamity, or be that something good, a blessing, but the opportunity is there. But here where we say is that it's really important that you see it is that it's an opportunity. At the end of the day, you have a choice to either take it, and you have a free will, you have a will. It's not totally free, since you can't overrule Allah, but your will is, you have a choice. You have a choice to take that opportunity and use it as a way to get Jannah, or you have a choice to say that, no, I'm going to leave that opportunity. And that comes about thinking of Allah in a good way. So we came all the way around from that to husn al-dhan billah, thinking of Allah in the best way. And that's one of the things about when you think about that hadith in which the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Allah said, "Ana inda dhanni abdi bi," I'm as my slave thinks of me. If you think about Allah in the best way, Allah will treat you in accordance with how you thought of Him. And if you think negative thoughts about Allah, that Allah's, this is all just, I'm just being led to the hellfire and nothing's going to work for me and I'm never going to be successful and I'm never going to achieve what I want, then Allah will deal with you in the way that you thought of Him. That's profound, huh?
It's crazy.
I don't know if I'm too deep, but I'm giving you some seriously profound thoughts,
We love this at Freshly Grounded. It makes me think about the times where how much of a loss we're at when we're given an opportunity and we only use it for gaining the dunya, or if we are given a calamity and we don't use it. Well, if we're given anything and we don't use it to get closer to Allah, because it's an opportunity missed. And that's what scares me about that. And that's what I was led to thinking about.
It is. And then the good things that you get, like all the blessings that you've had, all the good things that you get, all of those good things that happen to you are opportunities. And you have a choice. Again, it's a choice. Everything you have is a choice. So you got a blessing now. Your choice is to be grateful with it or not to be grateful. And being grateful is all about what you do. It's not just about what you say. Gratitude's not just something, you say, Alhamdulillah, Allah gave it to me. Thank God I got this thing. Allah said, "I'malu ala Dawood shukra." Act, O family of Dawood, in gratitude. David was told, act in gratitude. That's the reality of gratitude there. You're going to have to do stuff. You've been given a blessing. What have you done with it? Have you done something that made you nearer or something that made you further away? So that's the reality of gratitude. And that, now we came back to, links to sabr and jameel, because the two come together always in Islam. Sabr, shukr, always together. That's why Ibn al-Qayyim, in his profound book, he wrote about the two together in one book, patience and gratitude, because you're always between difficulties and blessings, everything that happens to you. So now I either have to be patient and learn how to be more patient, or I have to be grateful and learn how to be more grateful. And reality of our life is you need both at the same time. You're not in a state where you need only sabr or only patience or only gratitude. Your life's a mixture of hardships and huge blessings. And you've got to deal with both of them all the time in every day of your life.
We've had a common theme that's been unplanned in this podcast episode, and I think, it's the idea of coming closer to Allah, falling in love with the religion, bringing yourself back. If, for example, you have found yourself either kind of not fulfilling the obligatory rights, or if you just feel like you could be better. I think that's been a common theme. So I would love to end the episode with a piece of advice from yourself on, like, a direct piece of advice on whether on action someone could take, or what you think somebody should hear if they are saying, how do I now become passionate about Deen? How do I fall in love with religion? How do I become a quote unquote practicing Muslim? And kind of adding to that, it's probably a good time now to mention something that I read this morning, and it took me by surprise. A brother on social media that we know, he mentioned that he found out recently that a brother he used to drop home on his way from work, who he used to work with, recently passed away at 23 years old of a heart attack. Wow. With no prior thing.
Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un.
Whenever I hear stories like that, it really, really just aligns everything for me. So, yeah, Sheikh, like I said, again, conscious of your time, would love to end the episode with that kind of like wholesome kind of idea of how do I come back to Allah.
So I'm going to answer this two ways. One way that I think is for everyone, and then the second thing is about finding what works for you. So there's a personal element to it that's really personal to you as an individual, and a certain part of the advice has to be finding that personal piece of the jigsaw that just fits like that, and some of it is generic. So for me, I think one of the most you've got to one of the things you've got to start with knowing Allah. You've got to start with knowing Allah's names and his attributes and his actions, and not knowing them in a theoretical way. I'm not saying for you to start memorizing Hu Allahul Malikul Quddus As-Salam. I'm talking about living the names of Allah, living it in your life and implementing it in your life. I have a small series, for example, just explaining some of the names and attributes of Allah. If that's beneficial for anyone, can link it out in the notes. It's all about knowing who Allah is and then putting that slowly into practice in your life. Because it's only when you appreciate these things, like we just talked about, how much Allah loves you and how the things that happen to you in your life are opportunities because of how much Allah is Al-Wadud, the most loving, and Ar-Rahman, the most merciful. If you didn't know that about Allah, how would you ever cope with calamities that happened in your life? How would you ever be able to manage the bad things that happen to you if you didn't know about Allah's mercy? And how can you ever connect yourself and pray to Allah as a servant of Allah if you don't know who you're praying to? And I mean that many Muslims were brought up with a very dry, a very theoretical, a very, sort of, if you like, ritual acts of worship. We pray and we fast and that's wonderful. There's a big part of Islam, but ultimately it is really, really important that you have more than just ritualistic actions, that you actually have a heart that is connected to Allah, and the only way you can connect it to Allah is if you know Allah. So that's my first generic piece of advice. My second piece of advice in terms of the more specific stuff people can do is every one of us has acts of worship that have been made easy. Everyone. How far away a person is from Islam, every single person has some good deeds that they find easy to do. It could be, I just find it easy to be charitable to people. I'm a friendly person. I find it easy to smile at people and just be kind. I'm good at listening to people, or I find it easy to, I don't know, it could be to pray a certain prayer, or I've never been managed with my prayers very well, but I find it easy to fast the month of Ramadan, or something there. Start there. Start with that. That doesn't mean it's the most important thing, but that's something you can hold on to, because right now the shaitan tries to tell you you're not doing anything. You're not doing any good. There's no good in you at all. So you focus on those things and try to do a few more of them. Try to expand it a little bit. For example, if you're a person who always enjoy going to Jum'ah, for example, but you're struggling with some of the other prayers, maybe try staying a little bit longer in the masjid at Jum'ah time, come a little bit earlier, and you build on your deeds from what's made easy for you. That's one aspect. But the other thing is that to learn that Islam is a religion where there's a lot of progression. Things are not all on one level. There's a progression. So there are some things that are really important, and definitely the prayer is so important in Islam. The prayer is, it's the difference between us and between other religions. That's what makes us who we are. So starting to learn to pray again, I would definitely say if someone's not praying, starting to learn to pray. Maybe in the beginning, not being overly worried about some of the finer details, but just starting that and feeling what it's like to be a servant of Allah, because you can't really feel what it's like to be a servant of Allah until you're in sajda. Mm-hmm. It's when you're in sajda, when your forehead's on the ground and your hands on the ground, that you really are physically expressing what it's like to be a servant of Allah. So I think go back and learn the prayer. Don't learn it in that dry sense of we stand and we just pray, but learn the spiritual aspects of it, why it is that we say maybe some of the English translation of some of the words. Get your heart back connected to Allah. The last thing I'll mention, because I don't want to overburden the people, is even if you're struggling with the prayer, there was a man and he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said that, the laws of Islam have become, there's a lot, in the beginning Islam was pretty simple, and then there were quite a lot of laws came in and rules came in during the latter part of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, the laws of Islam have become many. So can you teach me something comprehensive that I can just stick to? He said, don't let your tongue stop being moist with the remembrance of Allah. That is profound, because at the end of the day, even if you find praying 5 times a day difficult, at least starting, and it's only a start, because we're going to say I can't be content with myself until I've started those 5 daily prayers. I'm not even where I should be at all. But if even those are too hard for me, maybe I can just start by remembering Allah with my tongue, just praising Allah, thanking Allah, glorifying Allah, mentioning the perfection of Allah, subhanallah, alhamdulillah. Few little things when I go out the house, I can start saying Bismillah, very small things. But each of those is just going to light a little spark of iman in the heart, just get you back into loving your deen again, loving Allah Azza wa Jal, feeling the sense of being a grateful servant. أَفَلَا أَكُونَ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا. Should I not be a grateful servant? And building upon that, dhikr is a really easy way, because remembering Allah is something that it doesn't take a lot of effort from you. You don't have to go make wudu. And then, of course, like I said, the thing that distinguishes, or the line that tells you that you've started practicing again, is your prayers, your 5 daily prayers. That's what defines whether you're really on the right track or not. But before that, even if someone's struggling with that, look at the deeds that have been made easy for you. Add some deeds that are not difficult for you, like remembering Allah, a few little adhkar when you go out of the house, you come in, little things you say, and then build up from there. Come to know who Allah is, know His names, know His attributes, get connected again, feel that love of Allah Azza wa Jal, and feel your heart soften as well, because the further you go away from Islam, the harder your heart becomes. And when your heart becomes hard, it becomes harder to do good deeds. That's one of the signs. You find that you're struggling to do good things because there's a certain hardness in your heart. So heart softeners are really good for that. Lectures that make you, or obviously authentic lectures, like we don't want to be like telling false stories or whatever, but that touch your heart, that make you want to cry, feeling that connection to Allah. That I feel that that's how I would start a person on that journey to start going back again. And it's a journey. We're all on that journey. None of us are, none of us have reached our destination. We're all on a path, but getting someone back onto that path and start walking again in the right direction, that's how I would do it. Allah knows best.
Sheikh, I really appreciate you coming down. You always, ever since kind of the first time we met, and one of the things that I remember the most is when I said, Sheikh, how much time do you have for me? And you said, however long we need. And I really appreciate that. You really do give Freshly Grounded and us a lot of time, and it's a lot of benefit. People absolutely love the episodes that you're on, and we love having you. So now
I love being here, man. I think this podcast is amazing, and Allah bless you, and Allah bless you, the people who are listening, the people who are watching. Allah bless you all, because
you don't know how much that means
amazing,
to us. Jazakallah khair, and inshallah, now that I know that you are possibly here in the winter, I'm going to try and steal your time perhaps.
All right. Okay, Jazakallah khair, appreciate it.